Thank you, EA Games, for the review copy. 2008's Dead Space is a game I'm very familiar with. A title that I genuinely love, made with nothing but passion for the horror genre by a team of cool people inspired by my favorite game series, Resident Evil. When I heard it was getting a remake developed by EA Motive, a team I had never heard of before this, I wasn't really looking forward to it. I, like many other people, thought, why remake this game? It's aged so well. As more info eventually came out, the more interested I became. After playing through the entire game in one 15-hour sitting and seeing basically all of its content at this point, I can easily and confidently say that this remake is not only the most survival horror thing in the Dead Space series, but one of its best entries ever made. Let's talk about it. I'm gonna start this review off by letting you know that Dead Space Remake has all, and I mean all, of the content of the original game, plus more. Like, imagine any small event or scare from DS1. You see it in your mind, right? It's here in this game, just like you remember it. This game actually got the RE1 remake treatment. Now, let's talk about the gameplay. The first thing you'll notice after maybe an hour's worth of exploring the Ishimura's extremely atmospheric interior is that Dead Space Remake is essentially a marriage between Dead Space 1's world and story and Dead Space 2's characterization and gameplay. DS Remake is a hybrid of both games, and while I was playing, I sort of dipped in and out of running or killing everything. I think action survival horror fits this game the best. You can kind of approach it with either mindset and still get by. Battles play out like you'd imagine. Hordes of angry necromorphs rush you while Isaac surgically strikes at their limbs, slowing them down and dealing extra damage. DS1's identical save points, item box stores, inventory and resource management, and using a very helpful map to get around are all tools that help you survive this nightmare. A lot of the game is doing combat or running from it, but DSR has so much more exploration than any other game in the series. We'll talk about that more in just a second. Isaac's movement and melee attacks are reminiscent of how he felt in DS2. He moves fast and hits hard. You can, once again, infinitely punch and stomp, which still feels satisfying. And all weapon firing and reload animations are loud, chunky, and impactful. At first I didn't really like Isaac's movement animations, but over time they really grew on me. I think this is the most accurate depiction of him moving in his heavy engineer power armor. It looks extra fitting when you unlock the level 5 suit, which is a hell of a lot bulkier looking this time around. He's got what I can only describe as a skillful waddle. What's really great about this title is that you can choose to play the game with either the Dead Space 1 or 2 control scheme, and they are very accurate to those original games. Like, hold the aim button and press the interact button to reload your weapon like RE4 in the Dead Space 1 control scheme. What's even cooler is custom controls. Yeah, DSR has a lot of great accessibility options, and you already know on my custom control layout, I completely removed the waypoint button and replaced it with the map, which, by the way, we have to talk about the fully interconnected USG Ishimura that I constantly spammed my new amazing 2D map button in. Yes, Dead Space Remake now has a Resident Evil 1 style, fully backtrackable game world. The original Dead Space had these semi-interconnected, open-ended levels that you, in theory, could explore to your heart's content, as long as you didn't get on the tram at the end. That isn't the case here, as the entire game is now seamless. Chapters start and end naturally, much like Dead Space 2. Unlike Dead Space 2, you're never locked out of any content or previously visited area. When you finish a chapter, you're still just standing exactly where you finished it. At any point in this game, as long as it's not the final chapter, as you may know, you can go from the deepest part of the ship all the way back to the docking station at the start. I actually did an experiment where I went back to the beginning of the game during the halfway point while exploring the USM Valor, and it actually worked. These aren't just levels anymore. You're in a world, and it's honestly mind-blowing. Very big Spencer Mansion and RPD vibes from this version of the Ishimura. Something I've noticed going back to Dead Space 1 and 2 recently is how detailed those games were visually for their time. Visceral Games really went off in the design department, pushing the hardware while not sacrificing on the overall quality of gameplay. I'm happy to say that EA Motive also brought their A game when redesigning every one of the Ishimura's locations. A lot of familiar rooms are now much larger, making for more believably laid out and decorated areas. Dead Space 1 already had a fairly tangible environment. So taking what was already perfect and expanding on or making certain places make more sense is exactly what Motive has accomplished. I think the most notable thing about the overall visual upgrade that better connects you to the gameplay is the clear emphasis on spectacle and scale. What were once small video gamey moments now get a 2023 makeover. The first thing I was looking forward to seeing get a facelift was the absolutely annoying ADS cannon set piece. In DSR, that set piece is now 100% normal gameplay. Combining Isaac's death-defying spacewalk with the asteroid shooting minigame was the perfect idea in reimagining this set piece. Recalibrating these cannons is an at-maximum 10-minute scenario that completely redeems this moment in the story. It feels important now and plays a pretty awesome role later. It's just a stunning redesign all around. When creating a bomb to destroy a barricade, Isaac no longer just stands in front of the explosion covering his face. You'll actually see him place the bomb, set it up, and then you as the player have to get him to cover before it goes off. He does still cover his face in almost the exact same animation, it just makes way more sense now. When reactivating the Ishimura's centrifuge, a cutscene plays out where Isaac struggles to keep himself standing while this gargantuan piece of machinery starts up, shaking the entire foundation of the room. Nothing is being sacrificed by EA Motive flexing their creative muscles in making even the tiniest interaction now a memorable moment. One worry I had going into this remake was hearing about the inclusion of cutscenes. The original Dead Space had maybe 3 real cutscenes, where the player absolutely loses control of Isaac. While there are more cutscenes like that in the remake, they never detract from the flow of gameplay. You're still in the game for 95% of its runtime. There aren't Uncharted-style set pieces or anything that messes with the original gameplay formula. I was actually more excited when one of these new high-budget cinematics began to play, because it often meant I could relax for a brief moment before being thrown back into the mouth of madness. As I'm thinking about it now, I'm actually struggling to remember any moment in this game that dragged or felt unnecessary. It feels like Motive took every great aspect of the series, polished it, and then trimmed the fat. A lot of the game progresses in the same ways, but early on, the player has to use alternate solutions to get around the ship. You're not just powering on the tram at the start and then using it to get around the entire ship. A lot of the time, you're trekking through tunnels and maintenance corridors, emerging onto the actual train platform of each sector of the ship, reactivating service at said sector. It's not out of the ordinary for a remake to play levels out in a different order, mixing things up and freshening the experience for a returning player, but the way Dead Space Remake does its thing now is so cleverly survival horror. As you're exploring these new hallways, tunnels, and back rooms, you're making a mental map of each area for your returning visits. You might see a locked door that you'll have to come back to later, or a few items that you can't pick up yet because your inventory is full. The tram really is more of a fast travel option that unlocks naturally through story progression. It's just downright fantastic level design that introduces real depth to each sector of the ship. It's not uncommon for a sector having up to 6 floors. The Ishimura feels huge this time because it actually is. I wasn't expecting any of this at all, and I hope I don't sound too much like a crazy survival horror fan here, but almost every 10 minutes I was getting excited about something, whether it be a combat set piece or a new or remixed story event. Thanks to this game's unique intensity director, the Ishimura also legitimately changes every time you travel back and forth through its dark halls. This new system is a random event generator that strives to keep you on your toes at all times. I played the game on hard difficulty, and I think this system was firing on all cylinders. At times, lights in a room would just go out and a creepy, inhuman noise would echo out in a hallway outside, making me think there'd be something out there when there totally wasn't. Don't get me wrong though, there would be times where I would just want to go back to a room and pick up a semiconductor I couldn't carry, and then get jumped by, no joke, 2 leapers, a lurker, and 2 slashers. It goes crazy sometimes. I hear you asking though, what's the point of backtracking in Dead Space 1? Wasn't that game pretty straightforward? Well, it still is, but now there's new side content laid all throughout this accursed mining vessel. Believe it or not, but this game actually uses the Dead Space 3 mission tracker. I'm not going to go into what these side objectives are exactly, but yeah, do them. You get cool stuff. A new reimagined aspect of Dead Space Remake's level design is the new security clearance system. So instead of opening up storage closets and locked rooms with upgrade nodes, Isaac's suit has a certain level of clearance. As you progress through the game, Hammond will increase this rank, allowing you to explore more of the ship, encouraging backtracking. I love this change for obvious reasons. It decreases node priority in a sense, so you never need to carry one of these things around at all times or risk losing out on secret items. I know you might be thinking, well, that removes a layer of risk-reward to exploration. To that, I say, that's what the Intensity Director and all of the new optional bathrooms, storage sheds, broom closets, and full rooms to explore are for. Remember, at any moment, you can go anywhere, and a horde of creatures can jump you while you're exploring. Security clearance also contributes to certain item chests and power nodes. Remember how in the original Dead Space there were always red light item lockers and chests? Well, you can open those now. This also adds to the game's phenomenal exploration. It's almost bizarre opening red light chests. I've lived for far too long not being able to do this, that it feels weird now that I can. Another completely new feature are the Ishimura's circuit breakers. So in certain rooms, you can reroute power to specific objects or functions in said room. One particular scenario sees you having to either explore a room in complete darkness, or with the lights on, but no life support, so that means no oxygen in the room. This is a one-off situation, but there are other really cool uses for the circuit breaker system all throughout the game. It's a very cool detail that illustrates the Ishimura's in-universe outdated tech. Dead Space 2's innovative free-float zero-G system is back and actually improved. So now when you spacewalk on the Ishimura, you can move in any direction, which is crazy to think about, because in the original, if you don't remember, Isaac had to do point jumps to get around these gravity-less environments. Now he can even roll left or right, adding more enhanced control to his maneuvers. I love how zero-G is introduced in this title. The first use of it is still in the zero-G therapy room, but right after this moment, you get to use it again in the hallway outside, now destroyed. You have to zero-G back to the door of the medical wing. It's such a cool way to get players used to zero-G in outer space now, while also extending the game in a meaningful way. You can still do combat in zero-G as well, and while we're talking combat, we've got to talk about the updates to Isaac's arsenal. The plasma cutter is 100% the same as it's always been, and yes, there is a one-gun trophy/achievement. Every other weapon has gained functionality overhauls, and you get them as you progress through the game. They aren't tied to schematics anymore, and all have a cool song that plays when Isaac gets them, much like when you upgrade his suit. Weapons are also inventory items now, and can all be carried around at once if you've got the room for it. But you can only have 4 equipped at one time, like a traditional Dead Space. The Ripper's projectile blade now ricochets off walls, catching enemies from behind and basically any other direction they're standing. The pulse rifle's secondary fire is now a sticky landmine that works a lot like the detonator from DS2. You can even deactivate the mines after being placed. Rest in peace, F everything button. I will miss your crazy sprinkler of death. The flamethrower gets a fire wall that stays on the field for a short amount of time. The force gun gets a gravity well that drags enemies and objects in. Combine that with the flamethrower or landmine and you can create tornadoes of destruction that decimate full groups of necros. And my favorite Dead Space tool, the contact beam, is now a legit railgun. Its primary fire is now a massive laser beam. Upgrading your weapons and equipment is obviously still a thing, and this time there aren't any node gaps on skill trees. No node is wasted. A kind of new feature are weapon modules. So throughout your adventure, you can find and purchase weapon parts that expand said tool's skill trees. These parts give you unique upgrades like DS2's final special upgrades. Another returning Dead Space 2 feature is the node respec system. If you made a mistake or just got a new piece of gear, downgrade something and repurpose that power, baby. The rework of Isaac's armory is one thing that I feel comfortable saying is completely better than the original game. Weapons are your most important tools for survival, and now they're treated as such. Stasis and Kinesis, aka TK, are here and similar to their DS2 counterparts. TK'd objects zap right to Isaac's hand, and you can use a necromorph's limbs against it. One of the grosser yet satisfying details to TK is if you weaken a slasher's blade arm, for example, you can sometimes pull it right off without fully severing it. It's super cool and absolutely disgusting. Stasis works a lot like DS1, where you need a recharge pack or station to refill it. Stasis does get a new damaging upgrade this time, which acts like a fun combo to your other damage-dealing implements. Every single Dead Space necromorph returns in disgusting, disturbing fashion. I was so hyped seeing some of the more rare creatures show up in this game, looking slightly different depending on the environment. Much like the slashers, there are different models of the other guys too. A lot of the creatures even have the same sound effects from the original game. So I played on hard difficulty my first run through, and in the opening chapters, I had a rough time with basic slashers. I felt like my plasma cutter was doing nothing against these creeps. I really enjoyed this because it gave me that classic backs against the wall feeling from traditional survival horror. Kneecapping and running past necros was essential at the start. I had to really upgrade the plasma cutter for it to feel like the powerful killing machine it used to be. This early game stress made me want to experiment with other stronger weapons that I'd never really used in previous games. I found an odd appreciation for the Ripper this time around because of this. Each enemy acts basically the same as the original game, besides maybe one or two of them getting some really cool overhauled attacks or, you know, movement states. That's all I'll say about that. Another new piece of tech this game touts proudly is its peeling system. Every enemy is now layered. As you deal damage, these layers begin to horrifyingly peel away. First the skin, a few layers of flesh, until nothing but bone remains. Not only is this really impressive from a technical perspective, but it also shows off how much HP an enemy has. Weapons like the contact beam and force gun can blast off most of a necro's flesh, leaving their weak bones exposed to easy severs. Flame and electricity also affects an enemy's body in different ways, and it all just makes for one hell of a satisfying and truly visceral gameplay experience. There was actually a moment that really stuck with me on my first playthrough. I was running from a horde and took shelter in a nearby bathroom. I found a woman hanging from the ceiling. One of the pursuing slashers managed to break into the room as I hastily shot it with my flame plasma cutter. This flaming creature actually collided with the hanging woman, and in real time I saw this cadaver's flesh melt off, leaving behind a disturbing, fleshy skeleton. I actually stood and stared at it like a car crash. It was really messed up. I hope the devs didn't have to go to therapy after making this game or something. It made me realize how powerful Isaac's armor really is compared to normal scientist garb or street clothes, with how he tanks so much damage on his various adventures. So that's all well and good. Yes, the game is very bloody, it's very gory, it's very fun, there's a lot of exploration, but I have been really positive so far. And while I do think this game is damn near perfect, I did encounter some small issues on my playthrough, mostly nitpicks, but let's talk about them. Isaac, being the tank that he is, barely gets knocked over in combat. I wonder if this was to achieve a faster and more satisfying pace to gameplay, but it felt kind of unbelievable at times. Seeing an exploder slam its pus sack right down in front of me, just to see Isaac flinching at it, I was like, what? The stomp animation has 0 transition frames between repeated stomps like Dead Space 2 and 3, so it looks a little janky if you finish off an enemy with repeated stomping. I noticed that the game's internal resolution would drop to 720p on PS5 performance mode whenever I use the tram. I can only imagine this might be because the tram is literally flying through the entire game in these instances. Not really a problem, but ugly for sure. I did also notice a few disappearing and reappearing elements to the environment on Backtrack. Like I said before, all of these are just nitpicks that never took me out of the game, but I thought I should bring them up. I'll also mention, as a PS5 player, I had 0 game-breaking bugs or glitches in my playthroughs, but I can only imagine what the PC release will be like. Recently, most every AAA PC port has been cursed with issues, and I'm really hoping that isn't the case for DSR, as its biggest player base will most likely be PC players. So I guess brace yourself for disaster if that turns out to be the case. Anyway, Dead Space Remake also has a lot of good replayability. Exploring parts of the ship you missed, finding more audio, video, and text logs, collecting new equipment, finishing unfinished side quests, and of course, the unlockables. Much like the rest of this series, DSR gets a New Game Plus mode. This mode isn't just about replaying the game with your current loadout, but actually offers up some brand new story content not available in your first playthrough. Stuff that is definitely worth experiencing, by the way. I really don't want to spoil any of it, but trust me on this one, okay? All of Dead Space 1's classic unlockables return as well, which really surprised me given my history with recent Resident Evil remakes. There's also the extremely challenging Impossible mode, which is a combination of Impossible from DS1 and Hardcore from DS2, basically being hard mode that only gives you 1 save slot, and death is permanent. So proper planning, knowledge of the Ishimura's layout, and a skillful trigger finger, as well as some good running shoes, are absolutely required to succeed. There might also be some really cool unlocks for this mode as well. The amount of replayability here is honestly shocking when we remember that this is an EA game. They easily could have cut all of this stuff out and sold it separately. Kinda like another company whose games I talk about all the time. By the way, going back to story content, I won't be getting into it too deeply, but I will let you know how I feel about some of the characters and the overall narrative. So let's dive in. I will say that overall, EA Motive did a fantastic job adapting Dead Space's already incredible story. Like I mentioned before, all of DS1's content is here. You play roughly the same story, but if it was exactly the same, we all know that wouldn't be as fun. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you this, but yeah, new things happen on Isaac's journey. Things that I believe, if you are a hardcore Dead Space fan, you will love. Motive did the smart thing and included relevant references and foreshadowing to other Dead Space games. You might be getting some Dead Space Extraction love, and maybe some other huge Dead Space game references that made me point at the screen and say something like, so that's why this person in that one game said this thing this way. You know, things like that. I'll let you discover the new content on your own, but rest assured, DSR's story will probably knock the socks off a new player while keeping an old fan on their toes. It's very, very good. One of the biggest things I was dying to see in this remake was how Motive would handle a speaking Isaac Clarke in Dead Space 1 going through the events of the Aegis 7 incident. I gotta say, Gunnar Wright, he did it again, guys. This dude is such an underrated actor, I swear. In this game, he feels like an inexperienced, more nerdy Dead Space 2 Isaac. He's got some really good one-liners and that signature confidence, but he isn't super cool yet. In Dead Space 2, Isaac was a guy just going for it, with nothing to lose on his quest for mental clarity. Here, he's a normal guy who actually makes suggestions, responds to his peers, and takes his helmet off when chatting with someone face to face. It's great getting to finally see and hear his reactions to the beginnings of the necromorph threat. Sometimes Isaac shouts out to someone who's dying in front of him, and sometimes he'll say nothing, his elevated and very audible heartbeat saying all you need to know. He's very matter-of-fact in his personality, and aspects of his backstory, if you know it, are clearly presented through the story this time around. Isaac also has a very good reason for volunteering for this mission that adds so much more to his tragic story. Off topic, but how crazy is it that they brought back Questions with Gunnar Wright? What year is this? 2011? Nicole Brennan, Isaac's long-lost girlfriend, the love of his life, has had such an amazing upgrade in the characterization department. Played by Dead Space 2 actress Tanya Clark, we actually get to see Nicole's entire journey during the fall of the Ishimura. Seeing what Nicole went through, desperately trying to save as many people as possible in this game, made me realize how absent she was in the original game. I'm not going to get into Nicole's story any further because it'll be a massive spoiler, but just know this game does her a lot of justice. I also wanted to mention this briefly, but I kinda love how Isaac and Nicole are now 100% based on their actors. I'm sure everyone's been seeing the discourse around these two's faces. It's not something I saw as a negative, and I'll say it's kind of refreshing having the love story be about two older people trying to survive and reconnect under extreme circumstances. Every love story nowadays is about some 20-somethings going through it, and I'm like, get out of here, kids. I don't care about you. Just get out of here. Hammond and Kendra go through the same events as they once did, but both get personality overhauls. In the original Dead Space, the devs wanted to create a hopeless vibe for the game's story. You, as this normal engineer, were surrounded by people you knew that you couldn't trust, constantly arguing with each other and losing their cool at every second. Isaac felt like a lowly worker being ordered around. That isn't the case anymore. Isaac, being the only one fully decked out in power armor, has to do all of the physical labor, but actually feels like he's being supported by his peers throughout this nightmare. You can tell Isaac's getting to know these people as he goes, and has some great back and forths with them, making certain story events hit even harder than ever before. Hammond has an actual character arc, and Kendra is so much nicer and supportive to Isaac in general. The two still butt heads at times, but it's nowhere near as hostile as it was in the original game. Massive shoutouts to the new actors, Anthony Alabi and Brigitte Colley, for giving these awesome performances. Finally, Chalice Mercer is back as one of the main antagonists and is so much more menacing than he was in the original game. OG Mercer came off like a crazy, rambling, prophetic unitologist, but here he's much more predatory, luring you into traps with his experiments on full display out in the open for Isaac to see. Shout out to his wonderful actor, Farron Tahir, for making this guy actually scary this time around. And that's where I stop with the story talk, cause all of the new stuff is just so good that I wouldn't want to ruin the surprises for you. As a standalone game, Dead Space Remake is incredible. As a remake, it's perfect. To me, this is now the gold standard for modern AAA remakes. It's got the insane production value, cuts absolutely nothing out, and adds so much more content and context to its original formula. This is the best remake since RE1 Remake, and I'm not saying that lightly. I can only hope that the upcoming RE4 remake is of similar quality to this title. Honestly, playing through this game made me realize how much Capcom's been cutting out of their recent remakes, which is funny because I'm sure this game had a much shorter dev cycle and was probably inspired by RE2 Remake. It happens to be a lot longer too, by the way. Please keep it faithful, Capcom. Do what Motive did here. With a first playthrough that'll run you over 12 to 15 hours, and even more worthwhile content to explore in its unlocks that add even more playtime, you're getting a pretty complete and worthwhile package out of Dead Space Remake. I'd say definitely check it out, but games are also really expensive nowadays, so proceed how you think you should. It's coming on 10 years since the last mainline Dead Space game, so personally I'll say I don't think you want to miss this one. While this is technically a remake, all of the changes make it feel like a brand new game that you should play. I can't believe I'm saying this in the year 2023, but Dead Space is back. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I hope you've all enjoyed this 4-part series of Dead Space Callisto Protocol coverage. This year, I'm kind of looking into covering more sci-fi games. Of course, a lot of that is horror-focused, and we will continue the ongoing RE retrospective, but yeah, I wanted you to know that we're kind of branching out a little bit this year. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and checking out my Patreon in the description. Alright y'all, it's been fun, but I gotta get back to playing more of this perfect game. I'll see y'all very soon. Later.